Shy Power, speaking to you from the international headquarters of the global revolutionary decolonial introvert movement, which is essentially a room in my parents' house full of books. So, just published recently was this wonderful journal, Speaker, from Norway in Bergen. I was supposed to travel there, and it's got a new piece of very substantial writing, a piece of memoir that I've written. Gentian is originally from Dundee, but she has this life hack where she decides to just live in Norway, and Norway pays you fairly. I was really paid fairly for this piece of writing, and she's a really lovely person with like such a cool, beautiful Dundee accent, and it even has the Shy Power logo, and the Shy Power sticker is given with each one, so there's like a Scandinavian front for the movement. It's quite beautifully written. The whole thing is a quite beautiful anthology, and there isn't that many spaces left for like art writing or art practice. Like the Happy Hypocrite, I think, it's just ended. There's a few minor publishers, but I'd recommend looking this up online. So I've done a 1-hour podcast. This is on the theme of silence, so obviously very apt to have Shy Radicals. And Gentia just wrote to me and said, I just love your work. And she bought me pizza on expenses of the Norwegian state. There's all these places in Europe which have a far higher standard of quality of life and development, which treat you fairly, and everyone chooses to be in London and New York, and these places which treat you quite badly. Even these sort of post-colonial journals pay you quite badly. These places like Autograph kept me on 0 hours contract, so I'm not going to go on a rant too much. Listen to the podcast though; it's got some beautiful pieces of sound art, and there's 3 episodes. Another one with C.A. Conrad. The other issues are on like collectivity and love. So I'm going to read you just a little bit from the memoir I wrote. I'm starting to write in straightforward memoir. My mum always wanted me to write a memoir of the campaign I did for my brother, and I always thought of doing that, called Extradite Me, I'm British. I mean, if someone like Joe Glenton can write about his experiences as a soldier, why can't I write about my experiences, since all the goodies and baddies in the memoir are alive, from Corbyn, Caroline Lucas, Riz Ahmed, Theresa May, and would make a good memoir. So I'm currently working on a longer piece of memoir for Wasafiri magazine. Memoir's a format new to me. I mean, this is a piece of experimental art journal. I could have written anything I wanted, and I've written a really straightforward memoir about being bullied for being shy. There's a beautiful epigraph, I think, from one of my favourite poets, Adrian Rich, and it says, "The blurring of terms, silence, not absence, of words or music or even raw sounds. Silence can be a plan, rigorously executed, the blueprint to a life. It has a presence, it has a history, a form. Do not confuse it with any kind of absence." Isn't that profound? And the foreword explaining the themes of the journal, and you can see the influence Shy Radicals have had on other forms of editorial and literary work, which really touches me deeply, even in Scandinavia. And these are places I've never been. I would have gone to Scandinavia if it wasn't for the coronavirus. It's one of 6 trips cancelled in 3 months. Poland, Slovenia, Italy, Switzerland, Norway, Netherlands. Hopefully I'll get to return to these places, and hopefully I'll get to go to Norway and connect with my Scandinavian front. Anyway, going back to the theme of silence of this journal, she says, "Silence is often approached as something lacking, as a space without sound. In speaking, silence is often considered to be in opposition to voice, its mute counterpart. In predominantly Western theory of voice, where we privilege the voice as the ultimate means to achieve empowerment, how could silence be animated as a space for resisted possibility? How could we learn to read silence in all of its nuance? The projected voice of power thrusts its monologue outward, and by nature of its volume, oh god, is that what I do? Commands space and demands an internal deafness to anything outside. The dominance of the institutional voice carries within it a demand to speak, This demand is also a demand for visibility, instilling a fear that if one does not speak up, one will not be seen. Reading silence, only in commonality with oppression, maintains a perspective perpetuated by institutions and political systems that insist silence equals powerlessness and voice equals agency. This demand of voicing shifts the focus away from the work required of those in power to learn, to listen. Silence as a non-responsive thwarts opposition by lacking substance, by resisting threat without urgently threat itself. Silence then becomes a withdrawal from normative structures, an overt refusal to participate. In other words, silence becomes resistance. Silence is listening. It gives us space to exchange. It allows space for the breath. It allows for freedom of not having to exist in constant reaction to what is said. Silence is the process that allows one to go within before one has to speak or act. This suspension of language produces a space for listening at the intersections, a stance of openness that gives us a capacity to know others. This is not to remove the urgency and necessity of hearing the voices of those who are being politically silenced through oppressive governments, patriarchal institutions and capitalist structures, but rather demand that silence becomes instilled within their systems, allowing spaces for those voices to rise. Wasn't that beautiful? That was just two pieces. I haven't even read the full foreword. I mean, you can get this from the website Speaker. You just type it online, and it's in its third issue. This is like £7. It's a lovely hard. It's like a paperback book, and you get your free Shire Radicals sticker, which is being distributed across Norway, and these things go out of print. If you'd like to stock or distribute it or archive it or bring it to your library, please support indie publishers. I ran DIY Cultures for 5 years because I believe in the importance of indie publishing. I'm on an indie publisher. I could be on a big corporate publisher, given I sell quite a lot for an indie publisher. But I don't think anyone but an indie publisher would bring out something like this. And there's so many formats of writing. I mean, you can see the full lineup of people. Do you recognise any names there? Any of your friends? So I'm going to now read a little bit of my memoir, which I hope you enjoy. So please order yourself a copy of this, or at least listen to the 1 hour podcast that has me and her in conversation. It's very original, and it's just me talking about the theme of silence. Shy power.